Okay, now what we're going to do is add a second lease. And to do that, we need to make some modifications to the formulas so that they're more automated. We're going to change the start date to 1/1/2021. And as you can see, that caused some of these to ref out. Now, what we're going to do to fix that is wrap everything in an if error statement. So now, if error means if you get a value, if a value is generated, you'll get that value. If not, then you want to generate something else. In this case, we want to generate 0. So you can see that first one is now 0. And if I copy this formula across, that's also 0. Now, as you can see, the rent starts at 2021. And we have to make some modifications to the escalations also, or the recoveries, as we've discussed. In order to do this correctly, we need to make sure that the cell references are proper. So this has to be 1/1/21. Then what we need to do is take that base amount for 2020, and down here we're going to grow it out by the expense growth rate, since we're starting this lease later. Just fix that formula quickly, and there we go. So what we now need to do is make sure that those base operating expenses are referring to the correct cell. Lock that cell, or at least lock the column. Drag it over. That's our new base amount. Now, as you can see, there is an issue where we're getting negative numbers, and we can't have that. And there's no such thing as a negative escalation. As you can see, the proper escalation should start at 2022, 1 year after the lease. So we have to modify the formula down here to make sure that we don't get anything below 0. To do that, we're going to wrap everything in an if statement that says if this formula dz48 minus dz49 is less than 0, then I want to return 0. If not, give me dz48 minus dz49. And to keep the dates consistent, I will just enter this date here, link that cell. Since we are using an operating expense that has to be consistent, I'll leave the dates in place and then just have the analysis finish out. Now, we're only showing this through 10 years from the first lease. So this should now not see any escalations until 2022, which is where the escalations start. Now, we need to modify the leasing commissions a little bit as well, and the tenant improvements, because those are now going to hit at the new start date. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a short version of the if statement, and I'll show you how that works. Let's say I have 1 and 1 over here. If I hit equals this, that's a true. Now, The other way of showing it is as a 1 or a 0. So watch this. If I put 5 here and multiply the 5 times the true, I get 5. That's just Excel's way of identifying. Now, if I were to change this to 0, false, and I get 5 times 0. So let's just show you that real fast. What I want to do is I want to have these leasing commissions hit at the same time as the new lease commencement. So if I hit AND, the date equals the lease commencement date, freeze that cell, or at least the column, parentheses, and then multiply it by tenant improvements and make that a negative. As you can see, that's now 0, and watch what happens when I drag the formula across. Just make sure that the cell is not frozen. Gotta double check that. Just lock the column. And now you can see that hits in 2021. And I'm going to do the same formula for the tenant improvements. Freeze that column. Drag the formula out. And my apologies, this was supposed to be the leasing commissions, so I will just quickly change that to the sum of the base rent and the free rent times the leasing commission. Lock that cell. Lock this range. And as you can see, we now have the leasing commissions hitting at the correct time. Now, the reason I chose to do it this way was because I wanted you to see where everything gets plugged in up top, and then how to make it more automated down here. Now we're going to set up the annual cash flow at the property level. So what we need to do is get the second lease onto our annual cash flow page and fix all the references, and then do some building level expenses. We'll do the same formula, sum ifs, go over to the lease, sum range, lock those columns, criteria range, which is going to be the year, lock that, and the criteria, which is going to be equals ampersand the year. As you can see, everything is flowing correctly. Widen that column. And there you go. Now, at the property level, remember, not all of the expenses are being reimbursed, and all of the leasing commissions have to be in the proper place. So what we will do is now create the property level cash flow. To do that, we need the base rent, the free rent, and the property level expenses, as well as the other items on the list. So let's bring down our dates once more. And we're also going to add subtotals and other items. Now what we're going to do is copy, paste special, and formulas. That brings everything down. And then we're going to use Format Painter to make sure everything is consistent. There we go. And we're going to change some of these lines. So we're going to start out with potential rental income. Now, this is only in-place rent. We don't have any market rent for now, but in the future we may. So we'll use the sum formula. As you can see, all the proper amounts are hitting. Then we will create a line, base rental income, another sum formula. Now, tenant expense reimbursement. Add those two lines. So let's do this the easy way. Put a number of X's over here. This just makes it easier to copy and paste. So as I've showed you before, copy, Control Shift right arrow key, Control V. And the expense reimbursements start kicking in year 2, and they should increase in year 3, as we see they do. Now, total potential rental, total potential tenant income is probably the best word there. Again, all of these names, there's a lot of synonyms, not just in real estate, but in the business world. And the reason I'm using some different ones is so you get the idea that of different names that can be used, and we'll talk, and you see that the math ends up being the same. Some people call this potential rental income. Some people call this, some people call it base rental income. Some people call it rental income. These names can change depending on the software you're using, depending on the company. Now we're going to add the rental income and the tenant expense reimbursements. Now, the building has operating expenses starting in 2020, as we discussed. And I'm going to grab those operating expenses from the reimbursement calculations that we did. I'm going to remove that $sign, just to keep the formatting consistent. The next line item to build out is the net operating income, which is the total potential rental income minus the operating expenses of the building. As you can see, we become profitable starting in month 7 when the initial free rent period is over. Then we have our capital expenses. I'm not going to make that bold for now. Sorry about that. Which is our leasing commissions. Which there's only 2, and our tenant improvements. And I should be able to just carry that formula down. As you can see, I was just able to copy and paste. And now we have our cash flow before debt service, or net cash flow in some places, which is the sum of the net operating income minus the capital expenses. That is the monthly operating cash flow.